Good evening and welcome to Hardfire. I'm your host, Joseph Dobrian, here with you for another half hour of news, politics, and current events from a libertarian perspective. We've got a little different thing for you this evening. We've got a sort of an inside discussion amongst libertarian activists and politicians about where our party is going, where the libertarian movement could go over the next few years. With me tonight are Isaiah MATOS, who was the Libertarian Party's candidate for House of Representatives on the in the Upper West Side of New York City, and also John CLIFTON, who was longtime chairman of the Libertarian Party of New York, also has run twice for statewide office for U.S. Senator and for Governor of New York. Yes. So I'd like to ask you, gentlemen, beginning with you, Isaiah, what did you learn from this campaign about where the Libertarian Party and the Libertarian movement might go? We didn't do too well, did we?
We didn't do too well as far as vote count percentage, but we did reach out to a lot of people, especially in New York, considering that it's a fully Democratic town. I think the Ron Paul movement had a lot to do with that. What I did learn is that the future of our party probably lies with the youth. The youth seem the most energetic about constitutional principles and libertarian ideals. So I think what we have to aim for is engaging the youth that were disaffected by both parties, because they were, and actually bringing them into the party and making them more active and actually running younger candidates as opposed to status quo. Okay,
now when you were running this past fall, what issues seemed to resonate most with the voters, that is in a positive way, the issue that made people think about voting for you?
In the beginning, the war was, even though it's been put to the back burner, a lot of people were still very upset about my opponent's war vote, and they were unhappy they couldn't vote her out prior to this. But most recently was the bailout and our perspective on economics with free markets and, gold standard and free banking. Those things really appealed to people once the bailout hit. So it was like an October surprise that helped us out a lot.
Okay, and then while you were campaigning, was there a certain issue that seemed to turn voters off of you, that made them say, hey, I'm not voting for you, no way?
Whenever I was at a town hall, and the problem with the youth is that they don't show up to these events, and older voters happen to show up to these events a lot more. The problem was, since I'm not a big advocate of Social Security and I'd like to reform it by actually closing the system, the older voters were so off-put by that. It was, ridiculous. Like I was taking candy from babies right in front of them.
I can just imagine. Now, John, you've run for statewide office twice, both for U.S. Senator and for Governor. And when you were running, did you find that there was a particular issue that resonated with the voters that made them want to vote for you? And then was there an issue that definitely turned them off of you?
I would say that there's, in general, for libertarian candidacies, you can get people committed in general to the idea of liberty, and in general to the idea of trying to bring government back to a bit more responsive stance vis-a-vis the average person. Depending on what state you're in this case we're in New York State, when you start to focus in on certain issues, that's when turnoffs begin, because a lot of people have an idea of liberty that in which they automatically excuse away their own particular part of the social safety net pie, or in the case of many Republican districts, the national security pie. A lot of people have vested interest in, from the point of view of personal ego, in American strength being projected around the world. Or some people have a sense of compassion or a conception of compassion that is limited largely to a public projection of support for funding of various welfare programs of one kind or another. And so when you hit those issues from various libertarian perspectives and assert the issue of non-aggression and not using force to solve problems, they'll understand the general principle, but the specific application has been a problem.
Right. Now, in the just recently concluded presidential election, we didn't do so well. Our candidate, Bob Barr, got just over 500,000 votes. Just under, I think, 0.4% of the total popular vote, which I would have to say is not doing very well. Do you think, John, that it's a good idea to even bother to run candidates for office, or should we make our point some other way?
Well, we look at it from the point of view of how we think of things, and as well as the average person. The average person thinks of politics in terms of, and goals in politics in terms of winning and losing. Win the election or lose the election. We have a different array of goals, to educate the public about liberty issues, to get ballot status in certain elections, to position ourselves in the political market, so to speak. The practical issue from the point of view of supporters of liberty is that they want to have some voice on the ballot if they're going to go to the ballot. If we're not anarchists and not committed to not voting because we don't want to legitimize a statist system, but we actually do want to go to the polls and vote, we would like to see a choice there that represents our views. So if we have a successful candidacy that got on the ballot and is representing libertarian positions somewhat or completely, that's considered a victory. Okay. Eventually we can grow from that, we think, to something else. I just wanted to add that the Barr results were slightly better than the Bednarik results 4 years ago for president, which were slightly better than the Harry Brown results. But the general drift of these election results indicates to me that, let me see, Barr got about 500,000 votes, Bednarik got a little under 500,000 votes, Harry Brown got 500,000 votes twice, Moreau got something like that, and Ron Paul himself in 1988 got only like 400 and something votes, something thousand votes. It indicates to me that the issue is not the particular type of candidate or the election year, but certain structural limits to how far we can get based on.
And we're just not very popular at this point, are we?
I put it in different ways. Money is one issue. Like say this year, Obama raised $600 million.
Right.
Our guy raised $1.3 million.
And that's higher than I thought it would be. Right.
Yeah.
Now, Isaiah, you are the most recent member of our party to run for public office here in New York. Do you think that it was worth it? Would you do it again? Do you feel that you maybe changed a few minds or got people thinking? Do you think you should have been doing something else with your time?
No, I was pleased with the results. I mean, I basically came out of nowhere and I garnered over 3,000 votes. That's nothing to sneeze at. It's not enough to win, but we don't have 3,000 members in our party, so that's 3,000 votes for liberty that came from just me campaigning and speaking to people. That's something you have to be proud of, as well as our ballot access, because through ballot access, I was invited to a lot of, different town hall meetings and different forums because people recognized I was on the ballot and we were allowed to enter into these things. So being on the ballot is very important to us getting more mainstream and, being recognized by the mainstream people who don't normally pay attention to the libertarian candidates. So,
okay. Now, as far as I can tell, it looks like if you're running for city office or federal office or statewide office, there are going to be different issues that you're going to have to focus on. For example, a libertarian running for mayor would have to focus on matters other than the libertarian candidate for governor and libertarian candidate for president. John, what strike you as some of the most important federal issues?
Right now, some of the most important ones have to do with the way the federal government is impacting the economy in basically turning over functions that it should be in control of to private interests that represent, let's say, supporters of a new form of corporate welfare, where, for example, the recent economic bailout of failing banks, in the fine print of the bill that was passed, it turned over an enormous amount of power to the Treasury Secretary and through him the Federal Reserve to just do what they will with federal dollars and then bill the public for it in future taxes, which is like a double insult. I think that's one gigantic issue there. Challenging the Fed structure and the new powers it's taking on or proxy powers it has. Other issues involve the ongoing mess of foreign policy and interventionism around the world, which is draining our money in a different direction.
Okay. Now, Isaiah, when you ran for House of Representatives this past fall, you campaigned mainly on economic issues, correct?
Yes.
If you had it to do over again, would you focus on different issues?
I think it depends on the times. When I started out, it was very anti-war, very anti-interventionist policies until the economy, those of us who study Austrian economics seen that this was coming, and we knew it was in a rush by the time 2008 came, that it was going to be an avalanche of economic mess that was coming. So circumstances kind of forced me to run into that area. If I was, recruited to run for a city council seat or something, that wouldn't be the primary factor or what I would run on. It'd be something like education, things like that, cleaning up the Board of Ed in New York City, the MTA problems that we have. So it would be a different kind of budgetary finance deal. But circumstances kind of forced me into the corner of running on an economic platform. Plus, it had significant popularity.
Right, I dare say. Now, you brought up education. If you were running for municipal office, that would be a hot button issue. Could you tell our viewers a little bit about what the basic libertarian approach to education is, assuming that public education is here to stay, compulsory public schools are here to stay. Mm-hmm. Within that framework, what would the libertarian approach be?
It's really simple. It's just opening up competition for the public school system. More private schools, more charter schools, homeschooling, without so much federal regulation and restrictions. And what I would personally try to work on is this one-size-fits-all model where, everybody's trained to do the same thing, but, everybody's equal in the eyes of the law. Everybody's not equal in mental capacity. So some people are more suited to be electricians, others are more suited to be stockbrokers. A school system should be catering to the person's strengths in order to teach them, and you can't do that with a one-size-fits-all status model.
Okay. Now, John, when you were running for governor, mm-hmm. Was education a big issue with you, or did you focus on some other issue?
I tended to focus on a basket of issues. I actually went on like 12 different themes that related to a general theme of bringing back liberty to New York. And I made 12 different applications of it, some of which were normal libertarian issues or new twists on them, and others which were a little bit new territory, like approaching veterans, for example. Addressing the 9/11 issue, since it does impact New York and New York City. The general thing I've recommended to a lot of people in whether it's a local or state race is to integrate what our positions are as libertarians with what the actual top 3 or 4 issues are according to the public, that you're running for whose office you're running. If the issue was education, you would talk about education, but you present a libertarian take on it. Like in my version of it was more choices for educating youth. That's a way to introduce school choice or federal tax credits or private schooling, homeschooling options, a whole basket of options that aren't where I'm not saying more public, more government schools.
Okay.
But you can address the issue that the public is actually looking to hear a politician say something about, and then still use that to talk about liberty. The one thing I've told people to avoid doing was picking your 3 issues and then talking to people about blah 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 blah. And meanwhile, you've lost them because you're not talking to their issues.
Of course.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the federal level, this year we nominated Bob Barr as our candidate mm-hmm. for president. His main opponent at the nominating convention was a lady named Mary Ruart. Now, those who objected to Bob Barr said mainly that he's not really a libertarian. He's a recent convert. We have very grave doubts about his positions on some of the issues, and we're basically just nominating him because he's a celebrity, he's a name, and people are going to recognize his name and possibly vote for him. Those, on the other hand, who did not like Mary Ruart said, well, for one thing, she's not known, and for another thing, she is so radical that she sometimes even embarrasses us. So my question to both of you, we'll start with you, Isaiah, is whom do we nominate? Do we choose somebody who is a big name, who might not be ideologically sound, but who at least commands high name recognition and won't scare the voters? Or do we nominate somebody who is a true radical who will explain the libertarian position but might alienate quite a few voters?
Well, it's easy to say that in hindsight now. But personally, I think I would go with the the radical libertarian. I consider myself more in the radical libertarian wing of the Libertarian Party. There were many positions Barr took, which at every town hall it followed me, and I would get questioned about them, and so these things would come up, and I was left to defend Barr's position from a libertarian perspective, which I was kind of difficult and for myself, because some of these issues I didn't agree with him personally, and the fact that he did have a past that was not very libertarian, and that also followed him around as well, where Mary Ruwart was the true libertarian, by all standards. And based on Barr's performance, I don't see how he would have done much better than she would have done either way with the money and everything that we put into Barr's campaign. She could have got the 500,000 votes nationwide as well. So it's not that cost effective to just hire someone who is going to follow our local candidates around in a negative way, that they're forced to defend his bad positions and compromise the principles of the party.
Is that pretty much the way you see it, John? Or do you have a different take on it?
I more or less have come to the same position. I originally was a Ruwart supporter at the convention, though I was aware of the benefits and minuses of each side, as you laid out. I think, given this whole general pattern over the last 20 years of whether we run a high-profile person who's got an actual serious political background from the point of view of the normal person, an elected congressman, or we run a purist kind of person, Harry Brown or Moreau or Badnarik, we get the same results. Perhaps we should, at this point, resolve to be the party of principle and vote in people who are known commodities in terms of where they are, versus somebody who went through a recent Damascus Road experience, like Bob Barr, became a libertarian. We hoped, but are still kind of like a work in progress. I know we had the same situation about 10 years ago for the mayor, where we were taking a wealthy liberal activist, and we were trying to figure out where we should nominate him for mayor. But we held a city convention for him, and we asked him 2 questions that he blew. And we voted him down. Right. But there would have been practical benefits to having him as a nominee, for mayor, but there you go.
That does happen at more of our conventions than I care to think about. That we will often have somebody addressing us who wants to run on our ticket, and we'll ask them a few very elementary questions about libertarianism, and we find out that they are not libertarians at all. They are not just ideologically impure; they're actually inimical to our cause.
But understand, so the opposite can happen, where, like, at the same interval a few years later, he was more libertarian. He was working. It was a work in progress, but it was arguably the wrong thing to do to make that person the standard bearer for the party.
Okay, yeah, it's like that story they tell about Wendell Willkie, the former Democrat who ran on the Republican ticket for president, and he was trying to convert one of his Republicans to support him for president, and this fellow said, "Now look, Wendell, if the town whore was to truly repent and join my church, I would personally greet her at the front door, and I would lead her up to the front pew, but I would not ask her to lead the choir the first night." Now, it seems to me, and I've talked with several libertarian candidates about this, that we seem to perform at the polls pretty well at about the same level, whether we campaign really hard or we're just paper candidates. There's not a huge difference. That being possibly the case, I'm wondering, do either of you have any ideas for other ways that we can get our message across that might be even more effective than running candidates? John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, my thought actually is along the lines of running candidates some more. However, doing it in a different way. We have made some gains in terms of insight based on the experience of the last 2 years, where we saw the amazing growth and organization of a grassroots movement in the form of the Ron Paul revolution. We've seen how people can, just the way we always say, figure out things on their own in the wake of a campaign that, in my opinion and in many other people's opinion, wasn't itself very organized and prescient on many things. So it took the Paul grassroots to actually come up with things like the money bomb and being able to find innovative ways to get his name out. One of the things that was done right by the campaign that did break new ground was that here you had a libertarian constitutional candidate running in a major party nomination race. And therefore, he wasn't blocked out by the media. He was able to go up against Giuliani and the other major candidates toe-to-toe, and got the exposure he would have never gotten otherwise. That allowed him to galvanize a grassroots following that was electric and excited about him, and could do things at the end of the last year, like do the money bombs that they did. And that possibly can be reproduced locally and statewide.
Isaiah, what do you think we can do to take the Ron Paul movement that has been created at this point and run with it and maybe build on it over the next couple of election cycles?
Well, I think we have to look at where we are to begin with. And we're in New York, and we're in an 80% Democratic town. What we should do is run our candidates in all the Democratic primaries, regardless of office. The fact being that the original Democrats, you know, the Jeffersonian and the Jacksonian Democrats, were hard libertarians. They were hard money guys. They didn't believe in central banking. You know, they were non-interventionists. So these ideas are something that were original to the Democratic Party. In the same way Ron Paul is always at the Republican saying, well, you know, I'm like a Robert Taft Republican of the original Republican style. We can do that with the Democratic Party here in New York. And if we're not successful in getting the actual the nomination, we still run our candidate as a libertarian because we've already chipped away at the Democratic base, and then we have no laws that will restrict us like Ron Paul was restricted from running as a third-party candidate out in Texas. We don't have that law, which is the spoiler law here in New York. We don't have that. The other things I would say is we need to increase our movement itself in the grassroots area. You know, we have meetings every month. We should start advertising those meetings. You know, it's nothing big. Make a flyer. Do you believe in the Constitution still? We do. Come join our meetings and put them around town every month. It's that simple. You know, we when we have our OPH booths, we should start selling things like books and other libertarian type deals that will draw people in for the purchase. And then they'll come, oh, let me take the Nolan chart, you know, as opposed to just some guys offering to give you a free quiz. You know, we actually have books for sale, so that will attract people, and then that message will be spread. So I think, you know, we have work to do in a lot of different areas, but it's nothing that we can't do if we implement it at the right time and do it properly. Okay,
and do you take much stock in the possibilities of demonstrations, guerrilla theater type events, any type of, you know, very, very public, maybe rather shocking events such as, a couple of years ago we did a pretty successful event called Guns for Tots, and then we have done free cigarette giveaways, things of that sort. Do you put much stock in that?
I do. I believe, you know, it attracts, but the problem with that is the laws. You know, the laws are, you know, set up to keep us from even exercising our freedom of speech and things like that. Not too long ago, we were performing a breadline theater. Jim Lazinski was there as well, and we were harangued by the police at Grand Central that we weren't allowed to do this kind of thing, you know, on public property. So I do put stock in it because it draws attraction. And we can speak to people about it, about the message, you know, by having mavens included in these opportunities. But at the same time, we need to be mindful of the legality of what we're doing with it.
Okay, and John, I'd like to ask you about that too, but I'd like to ask you also about just how do you organize libertarians? Because we are all such independent people. A lot of us are people. We don't like to demonstrate. It's like herding cats to try and get a bunch of libertarians together. How do you do it? How do you organize this?
Well, you organize, first of all, you pick some issues that at least X set of cats are really excited. We'll get out and do. Some will go out and go out on a limb and do a drug-related street theater. Others out there and do gun-related street theater and tax-related and so forth. Then you give them a clear purpose, number two, about what can be accomplished from it. I think the main thing accomplished by events like Guns for Tots was our version of triangulation. You know, the standard main is, like in the Clinton days, Clinton would get the Democrats, some subordinates in Congress, to say something radically extreme in favor of a certain bill, and that would draw Republicans to say something harsh against that, and then Clinton would step in and be presidential and say something, you know, down the middle that they gave most of what they got. In version, we did something radical to create a reaction by the city council in the form of pulling them back from adding another gun control law or toy banning law to the books.
Right.
It's not the result we wanted, even though we're not acting as the person, but in this case the the extreme party side, that we create a direction that pull legislation in our direction.
Okay. Another thing I'd like to ask you about is how do we attract more women to the libertarian movement? Women constitute about 50% of the electorate, and generally speaking, they do not go for libertarians. They prefer a more service-oriented, more authoritative government. How can we state our case specifically to women voters to make them more sympathetic and to find issues that might ring a bell with them?
I was suggested that some of the immediate things is run a women candidate. As we were about to consider Mary Ruwart. Before we got in, I was thinking of one of the other women who was running for the presidential nomination. Another thing is to emphasize responsibility, personal responsibility issue when you're talking to women instead of the liberty side. We believe in both, but we can emphasize one because that's there's side women likely to be more responsive to.
Okay, another criticism of the Libertarian Party is that we're somewhat of an anomaly within the Libertarian Party. How do we attract more black folks?
You have to remind them of things about the history. I mean, some African American or black people I know are shocked when they talk about guns, and I told them the first gun control laws were anti-black. They were designed to stop slaves, ex-slaves after the Civil War from acquiring any guns. Apparently the slave masters were very frightened about ex-slaves having access to firearms.
Okay.
So that kind of thing.
Isaiah, same question to you. How do we attract more ethnicities to the libertarian movement?
Well, I think the message in general would attract, especially immigrants. I'm Hispanic, and the message. Most Hispanics come to the country as immigrants for a better life, so they can have businesses of their own and things like that. Okay. So I think the message itself would stand alone as long as we present it right to the communities.
Very good. And on that note, we have to stop. I'm very sorry this could have gone on for another half hour easily, but thank you all for tuning in, and come back and see us another time on Hardfire.
Free or die!
Hardfire is funded in part by the Libertarian Party of New York. www.ny.ep.org. Catering for the cast and crew of Hardfire is generously provided by Da Vincenzo Restaurant, 256 Prospect Park West, Brooklyn, New York, 11215. 718-369-3590. www.davincenzorestaurant.com.